How to not waste a day off. Productive Pastor 17. What's going on, friends? We're back. It's good to see. I took a week off last week because of vacation. And that's going to kind of come into the conversation a little bit today. But, just decided the world's not going to end if we don't have Productive Pastor 1 week. It was I'm telling you what, I was tempted to try to record this conversation today, quick and easy and release it as a surprise. But I'm glad I didn't, because I feel like it's a lot better now than it would have been. So we're going to talk about how to not waste a day off. Before we do that, just like one bit of housekeeping things. Are you signed up for the email list yet? Now, if you've ever purchased a product or downloaded one of the free resources, you're probably on there. But over the last couple of months, I've started sending out a weekly email most of the time. And it's a deeper dive into just a single aspect of productivity in ministry. Friends, I think this is where some of the gold is actually coming out at. And so if you're not getting these emails yet, you can find the link to the email list over in the show notes, revchadbrooks.com/PPP/017. But if you're not signed up for the email list yet, I'd encourage you to do so. I'm not spammy. We're not crazy about that sort of thing, but some fun conversations are starting up on that email list. And like always, I reply back to people. So some fun back channeling. What's going on? Back channel. I feel like I'm watching West Wing when I say that. So, okay, how not to waste a day off. Let's not waste any more time, and let's jump straight into that content. So I just got back from a week of vacation, mentioned that earlier. And I'll be honest with you, there was a time when this sort of thing was absolutely maddening to me. I was nervous to be away. I was constantly checking on things. I was nervous every single time my text message would ding or I'd get a phone call. Just the idea of my email updating gave me anxiety in those moments. But I also think beyond that, one of the issues was I did not know what to do on vacation besides not work. And that's the thing. Time off is not just not working. And it goes further than a vacation. Like, what do you do on a day off? And I've ebbed and I flowed through being proactive about that time off with different levels of successes, all of that. And one of the things that made me actually start thinking about it deeply and it sticking was how I took time off during the pandemic, especially those first 6 to 9 months. My wife was working virtually the moment it started. She worked virtually. It's a permanent thing for her now. And as things moved on, I realized that I was going to have to rethink my time off strategy and my day off strategy. Because, being off at the house while she was working was difficult because, my friends, I'm a little loud. And probably not just a little. I'm a lot loud. Time off for me back then looked like sitting around the house watching TV. I would cook, which was always kind of loud. I'd play my guitar, which was kind of loud. The whole 9 yards. So it's during that time, I kind of had this moment of, oh my goodness, what's going on? Because I had to rethink time off because of the space that I was in. But it really makes you think deeper about the idea of rest and what rest is like, how to do rest. Remember, resting is different from crashing. It's episode 4 of the podcast when I talk about that. And it sounds a little wild to what it really means to take advantage of rest. Whenever and whatever that looks like and how to be intentional. But I remember reading this book years ago. I found it on Amazon to get the title of the book correct. And I saw that I purchased it in 2013. So 9 years ago. This is back pre-Productive Pastor podcast. But I remember it was pretty influential to me back then. And it's called What the Most Successful People Do on the Weekend. A Short Guide to Making the Most of Your Days Off by Laura Vanderkam. And it seemed at the time absolutely crazy to plan your days off, but she has some really good thoughts. She also did a TED Talk that I watched earlier today, and it made me fall in love with just her understanding of productivity and what that looks like. But it's called How to Gain Control of Your Free Time. I'm going to link to that book and that TED Talk in the show notes. If you're interested in seeing those, you can just go to revchadbrooks.com/PPP/017 and do all of that. So what I want to do in this episode is I want to talk about 4 things I have found that comprise rest. And all these things are different from work, but they're things to look forward to. They're ways for us to think about our time off differently. And some of them are intentional to serve as some sort of an opposite of what work is like. So you can't really call this a Sabbath episode, although that understanding is definitely there. It's part of it. But really, this is how to not waste the time that you have off. It's kind of a continuation of that whole crashing isn't the same thing as resting piece that I've talked about off and on for years. So 4 things that I comprise into the idea of time off, whatever you want to call it. 4 things: reading, playing, relating, and resting. Read, play, relate, and rest. So read first. There's that old Delirious line. Remember Delirious? Did you listen to Delirious? It said, it's time to dream again. This summer, I made the decision to start reading great American fiction. I wanted to have something special to look forward to during times of rest. And I don't want to just grab the book when I have a couple of moments off, but when I'm going to sit down and indulge in not working, I want to read this specific thing. And I only buy stuff in hardback, by the way. I'll talk about that more later on. So it might be some time I find in the afternoon or the evening. It might be more traditional time off, like a day off, a Saturday, that sort of thing. It might be a Sunday afternoon, which there's something about a Sunday afternoon. It hits different than any other time of the week. It might be vacation kind of stuff. I read Mario Puzo's The Godfather in a day and a half last week on vacation. It was fantastic. But reading, it lets our minds wander and work at the same time. Reading, it lets we continue to function cognitively, but in an enjoyable state. Reading, it makes us better. It's plain and simple. We know that reading is good for us. Reading is also a known stress reducer. It helps with our cognitive flexibility. It develops our executive function. If you're a person that struggles with ADD or ADHD, that whole idea of executive function is huge. There's an article from the Telegraph, it'll be in the show notes, called Reading Can Help Reduce Stress, that was really interesting to talk about these things. But like I said, I've been diving lately into fiction, and I've never really read fiction outside of like trucking through the Hardy Boys when I was in middle school. And I used to rest by reading non-church, religious, or leadership type stuff, or even like theology sorts of things. But I still found myself going into work mode, even with general nonfiction, like history stuff. And so what I said this summer, I decided I'm going to start reading 20th century American fiction classics. I finished The Godfather. I'm now diving deep into John Steinbeck. I'm reading East of Eden for the first time. I only have physical copies. And I'm doing all that because I want something about picking up that book that signals to my body and mind that I don't have to think about, or I don't have to worry about what work might look like. I'm not going to read those things in the morning if I know I'm going to work that afternoon. I'm trying to do everything I can for when I pick up that specific book, for my whole being to know you are not working right now. You're not working for the rest of the day. You are at peace, have a sense of calm, all that sorts of things. So whether it's 45 minutes in the evening, a couple hours at a time, or even a day or so, I think reading allows us to slide into rest because our mind is still working. I think reading, it's a good intermediary activity for some of us. I think that, if you can squeeze some reading in the evening, it lets your body know that if you're on vacation, those first couple of days when you're struggling to get your body out of work mode and into relaxation mode, I think reading is that it's like an on-ramp into that sort of a thing. So the first thing that we do, how to not waste our time off, is to read. The second thing is play. And play is an interesting thing. As we get older, play takes us on a different note. For some of us, we might take it quite literally, and we're going to go play a game of golf or basketball or pickleball or some other sport. If you're not a physical game sort of person, like I'm not a game person, I think it's also important to get outside and do something physical that's enjoyable. Take a long walk, spend some time swimming, that sort of thing. For people who work primarily with our heads, spending time with our hands and our bodies, it is restful. It's another one of those moments that shuts our mind off to just the vocational side of our being. This is going to seem kind of odd, but I'm actually going to add cooking into the category of play because it happens with our hands. It still takes focus, but it has a result and it's finished. I think that's the thing that really defines play for me, is there is a result and there is a finishing. And with that same categories I just threw out there, I will throw fishing and hunting into this term as well, because when hunting season starts, I hunt a lot. I save up time to have time to hunt because you finish things. And I think play also matters because it activates our whole body. We are thinking and we are doing. And sometimes this is more organized, like a sport with other folks. It could also be playing like Legos with the kids or like board games. I know there's a lot of clergy that really enjoy the idea of board games, and that's a whole big, huge thing, but that falls into play. There's also a lot of psychological benefits to play. They're a very real thing. We need play to develop our mind. We need play to let our minds rest. Play is a way that even as adults, we're building out new ground in our neurological pathways, that when we don't play, we eliminate a natural part of our biological development that's never supposed to stop. Our brain is always developing. Our brain is that only muscle. If you go into the whole idea of neural dynamics and neuroplasticity, all that sort of thing, you realize that our brains are this organ in our body, this muscle, unlike anything else, that is worked out and is always growing, is always changing, can self-heal, all of that stuff. So play, it helps our communal development, it helps our emotional health and regulation, it helps our psychological flexibility. Play has to be there. Just yesterday, I had about an hour to burn after things, and I jumped in the truck and I went out and I found the trail that led to the campground that I loved when I was in high school. And I'm excited. I figured out how to get back on it. The road's a lot better than it used to be back then. I'm absolutely stoked and ready for the weather to get a little bit cooler so I can take advantage of just hiking again on days off and taking 2 or 3 hours to do that. I had a decent-ish spot to do that when we lived in Monroe, but it was covered in snakes half the time, and I didn't like that. I got a new place to do that because play is this thing that we have to be doing. It's like if reading can jump us onto that pathway, play can get us even more so there. So we read, we play. The third thing about how to not waste time off is that we relate. And I think that relating goes along with play very well. But for a vocation that was isolating before the pandemic, and you hear people talk about how ministry can be very isolating, it's even more so now. And it's also good in our jobs, they depend so much on interpersonal interactions. To think about it this way, if the only time that we are with other people and relating to other people is while we do our job, we're going to find hiccups in how we can rest and relate. And this is the thing that might be very complex for some people. Understand this, depending on where you live, your ministry situation, age, all that kind of stuff. But if we only relate with people while we're doing our job, it's going to be janky for us. One of the things I did years ago is I used to go to a cigar lounge on my day off, and I would spend a few hours with the folks there. And sometimes I'd go there when I had to work, and so I'd get off with a book in a corner and do a little bit of times there. But most of the time I would go there so I could be with other people. I would join in on the conversations and the stories that are part of that atmosphere. I'll tell you what was really funny is when we were starting the church, the first few months, my district superintendent had to come in the cigar shop to give me my paycheck. That was pretty funny, but Ellen was cool, and Ellen, she let me be myself back then. So that idea of relating, we have to be relating to people. In the last couple of years, when we lived in Monroe, one of my favorite times of the week was Wednesday nights, and I would go to my favorite restaurant. It was owned by a friend of mine. I had a lot of friends on staff. I would just post up by myself at the bar because my wife had something going on, and she was out of the house during that time. I would order dinner, and I would just talk with the staff and my friends that were there, all these sorts of stuff. I began to absolutely treasure my Wednesday nights at Revival Pizza. Sometimes these were silly conversations. Sometimes they were deep conversations. Sometimes it was just about getting to be around other people. I made some fantastic relationships with people while I was there. I knew I would see people when I walked there, and I found myself in like the deep into 2021 where things were really mentally tough for me. That was one of like my salvation pieces. Like, I know I can go there and be around people. And then over time, it became known like, hey, you need to go find Chad. He'll be at Revival on Wednesday nights. So just go post up. And what's so fun is the thing my wife had was at church, and after that was gone away, half the time I'd have church folks slide over there. So it was just like incredible, really cool 3 or 4 hour block of being deeply social. And it's one of the biggest things I miss since moving is not having like my whole Wednesday night there anymore. But we need to relate to people. We need to refuel the relationships that we have with them. You know, when we don't pay attention to this part of our life, we're going to find a massive emotional hole open up. For me right now, you know, I spend a lot of time with family during my time off. That's another signal to my body that I can relax. To spend time with somebody without any sort of agenda is a freeing thing. And if you're in ministry and you don't have that, that needs to be a goal that you set to try to find a way to do that. One of the things on my list of stuff right now is to currently find a place where I can go be around people during time off. What that might look like, I know with the summer going over and, you know, nephews and nieces going back to school, that kind of stuff, like that's a priority for me to find that like middle of the day social space for time off. So we read, we play, we relate, and the last one is rest. What is rest, and specifically this type of category? We've talked about rest in some like macro level right now, but let's talk about it in a micro level. Rest. I think naps are a beautiful thing. I think doing absolutely nothing is a beautiful thing. And at times, I think this can even be, you know, zoning out, watching a movie or a show. Remember the whole crashing isn't the same as resting. I think to rest, we have to have had a couple of other things to be for just that sort of resting to be healthy. We have to have kind of on-ramped ourselves well with some of these other things. For me, naps are a thing I find myself doing when I have an extended amount of time off. It might be a couple of days at the deer camp. It might be when I have a week-long vacation or a Saturday afternoon sort of thing. Some of the adaptations that I've made over in my own life have been around this idea of rest. Like, what happens when you get to this level of peacefulness? Why I read fiction on a hardback. I don't want to be tempted to use my iPad for like a quick bit of work or to go over and watch a YouTube video, that sort of thing. When I get to this level of offing, maybe, is that the right word? Sabbath thing, that sort of stuff, my phone is not going to be with me, but I can't do that instantly. I have to slide into that level. You know, I will put timers on my social accounts on those types of days as well, so I know if I've been on there. I think I give myself 20 minutes a day on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram when I'm like in the deep rest mode, that sort of stuff, because I want to have the ability to be. You know, I might get up early in the morning and have coffee and a cigar and watch the sun come up. I love doing that. One of my other favorite things to do in the fall or the spring is when I'm in a deep moment of resting is to take a driver in the deer camp at the sunset and listen to Willie Nelson. It's just like there's a 5-mile gravel road that I'll just make that loop 2 or 3 times. Listen to Willie, watch the sun go down. I am absolutely at peace in those moments. And to me, I can best explain rest in terms of having this space to not be hurried. I don't have anything I need to be doing besides thinking about the next meal. Let's put it that way. It's the opposite of having to cram in my hobby or that sort of thing. We've all had the spaces where we've had to cram rest into our life, and it sounds backwards to say that, but we've been there. That's the kind of the indicator of crashing. And as I try to sum up this whole idea of time off and why it matters, it also brings us into a conversation about burnout. That's one of those words that, you know, clergy are talking about a lot right now, and I don't want to go too deep into the topic because I spend most of my day talking about burnout with people. But in my own experience and the conversations I have with other pastors, it seems like burnout, it's tied to some sort of a loss of identity. And in my coaching, I'll use Strength Finders and that model, and I'll to talk about how to regain identity and an agency in a vocational way. But another component of burnout and identity is how we are resting. How are we sabbathing? And like many, I found myself sometimes dreading those times of not working or days off, because a season hit in so many of our lives where we just doom scroll on social on the couch, or we crash. But the remedy, I think, to finding these sorts of things specifically as it relates to our resting is, what are the ways that we can separate time and action in our life in a Genesis 1 sort of way. So this is a Sabbath conversation, I guess, the more I think about it. So let's just call it that. There needs to be some sort of separation from the things that cause us to work. And ministry leaders, it's just a difficult conversation. So let's just name it and call it out. Say, hey, I need to have separateness in my life. So as we wrap this up, this is what I want you to do. This is your call to action. I would love for you to come over to the Productive Pastor community on Facebook. And I'm going to start a thread there about time off. And I would love to hear from you inside of that thread. Like, what are your favorite things to do in those 4 categories of reading, playing, relating, and resting? Because they're all going to be different. It's going to be a fun way just to kind of open up ourselves to each other there a little bit more. So thanks for hanging around for this episode, kind of coming in deep here at 22 minutes. It's always a privilege to be here in your ears, wherever you're listening to this. I thank you so much for being part of that. Thanks for being part of this whole community. One of the most treasured things I have is to be the steward of this group of pastors having this fun conversation about productivity. And so until next week, I'm Chad. This is Productive Pastor, and I thank you so much for being part of stuff.